my God, it's like we timed the music, but we didn't. Right. Okay. Hello and welcome to the first ever Tech London Advocates Future of Work's Future Friday Lunch and Learn Twitter Space. I'm so glad we thought of that name. My name is Paul Armstrong, CEO of Emerging Tech Advisory here Forth, and I'm your host for the next hour. Each month, I'm going to be selecting one or two people to talk about a subject impacting the future of work. If you don't know who Tech London Advocates Future of Work are, let me enlighten you. We're a global think tank that explores challenges and suggests practical developments for the future of work to help businesses succeed in the post-pandemic world. Tweet, DM, or email me if you'd like to join up, and I'll get you in front of the right people. Trust me, you'll want to be part of what we're cooking up. There's a lot of good stuff going on. All right, on with today's lunch. So please do feel free to let me know what you are eating. I do want to know. I'm going to be passing the mic around, which is not only terrifying for someone who hasn't really done that on previous Twitter Spaces, but also, we're going for it. Why not? Today's inaugural smart cookie is none other than world-renowned futurist Tracey Follows from Futuremade Consulting. Tracey specialises in the application of foresight to boost business and works with massive brands and corporations. Tracey's new book is called The Future of You: Can Your Identity Survive 21st Century Technology? And it discusses a range of technologies from everything from health passports to virtual legacies and a lot more besides. Today, we're going to be laser focused on the world of work. From Think with Google to Forbes and CogX. Tracey is currently everywhere, and for good reasons. Cannes Lion, everything. You're about to be witness to her greatness. Tracey, welcome to the first ever TLA Future Friday Lunch and Learn session. I'm having a chicken salad, if my personal trainer's listening. What are you having for lunch?
I haven't had it yet. The most important thing is the
the mic by clicking the mic button at the bottom left, and also, and I'm very particular for this, please be succinct, all right? Or if you've got your mouth full, use the hashtag Future Friday and I'll ask it for you. Before we get going, please let the world know that there is something great happening right now. Click the bottom right hand staple with an arrow pointing up, all right? So bottom of the screen, arrow pointing up, bottom left, bottom right even it is. If you click it, you'll have three options, and if you just hit share via tweet and write something very nice in there and then just hit send, forget about it, you'll alert more people that we're actually talking, because Tracey's got a lot to say and I've got some good questions, and hopefully you've got some good questions as well. Tracey's promised something incredibly special to everyone if we get over 150 people in the space, so there's everything to play for. Okay, Tracey, it's lunchtime on Friday. It's 2021 and there's a tiny thing called a pandemic raging around us, slightly coming back as well if we're looking at news reports. What are you binging on Netflix this weekend?
I actually don't have Netflix anymore. I got rid of my TV in May 2020. Actually, I say got rid of it. I decided I wasn't going to watch the TV anymore for lots of reasons. And then actually, a couple of weeks later, it set on fire.
What?
It was a bit of cosmic ordering, I think. Yes, and I thought, well, look, that's just fate. So it's actually sitting in the garage waiting to go to the dump. But I am going to watch, maybe on Amazon Prime, possibly, Dark City this weekend. I'm getting very heavily back into sci-fi movies, and I'm kind of watching a lot of those. I'm also doing a sci-fi course, actually, so that's probably why.
I'm not surprised. A lot of the stuff that they are popping out is sci-fi because of the love of animation. I don't need to record things. I mean, who knew in a pandemic, eh? It was interesting. I was wondering if you were Amazon Prime as well. Interesting. All right. The book is absolutely fascinating, and I took your advice and read a chapter at a time and then sort of thought about it. I've actually done a bad thing, what I consider a bad thing, and scribbling in a book just in case I ever gave it to somebody else to read. Anyway, I did it. In your own words, give the listeners a short summary of what the book set out to achieve and what it covers.
Okay, so it sets out to broach a discussion and a debate about the future of identity. So, excuse me, where do we think our identity is going? Traditionally, we've always debated and discussed this really with a view to thinking that identity is either residing in the consciousness, it's the psychology of the self, or it's residing in the body, the physicality, and it's the biology of the self. And both of those have moved on leaps and bounds. There's advancements and developments in both those areas. But my provocation and premise, I think, is that those two dimensions have been joined by a third dimension, which is the technology of the self. So we are literally using technology as tools, but we are taking it in almost well, actually, practically in the future, into ourselves, into our cognition, into our physicality. And even if it's outside of us, it's still really influencing and impacting on our notions of the self. And the fact that even as we go forward, we might even have more than one self. So we talk about alternative identities and extended identity. And I wanted to get in amongst this and sort of think, well, what is happening in the 21st century? What's going to happen, and how is it going to influence how we think about the self?
You wrote the book because your account got hacked on Facebook. Tell us what happened after that.
Yeah, so it's the weirdest thing. I was getting all these emails saying, "Dear Byron." They thought I was called Byron Loworth, but they were emailing me to my email address, which has not changed in decades. And so what transpired was I couldn't log into my account, put in my passport to give them, as they had requested, some verification, authentication. And Facebook came back and said, "This isn't you." So you asked me what happened after that. Well, nothing really, because the system doesn't really allow you to sort of bring a case or try and get that reviewed. So the machine had read me as not being Tracey Follows, and I have not been able to log into my Facebook account ever since. So I'm guessing that I kind of exist in limbo somewhere. All my photos are there, all my previous and past experience, lots of relationships and friends, and probably loads of other things that I can't even remember. So I sort of spookily have an identity somewhere in the Facebook database, I guess, but I can't access it. But clearly somebody else had accessed it. I don't know how. Could have been a mistake I made clicking on a link somewhere months before. Who knows? But there is a chap called Byron Loworth who now seems to have access to my Facebook account, and seems to also have created some sort of synthetic identity, I think, on Instagram, with some people who coincidentally have my names.
There's a lot to go through there, isn't there? There's a lot on, it's Facebook's control over what governments say our identity are, and that's something through passports and that sort of stuff. Monzo and those sorts of things also verify. They verify using a couple of tactics at the moment, but biometrics is really an important part of where we're sort of like going. And when you think of identity verification, it's a big part of the book, and just I think in the last couple of months we've probably seen about 500 million invested in services and startups that deal with various areas in that sort of field. Do you think like a global, portable, decentralized identity standard is going to emerge for companies?
Well, that is an interesting question, because at the moment, you're right, we have lots of decentralized digital identity apps or wallets, and they're all, well, not all of them, but a lot of the very best of them are working to some very high standards. But the questions are always, how is that interoperable? So it really does suggest that we need some kind of global standard, but how you get to a global standard, I don't know. I mean, when I was writing the book, one of the first people I spoke to was Drummond Reed at Everlyn, and he was embarking on a book at the time about self-sovereign identity with a co-author, Alex, and they were writing this, and they were writing it in real time. The funny thing is, I'm pretty sure this morning I saw a message from him saying that they'd finished the book, so you can now read all of it. But I interviewed him. He very kindly gave me some of his time, and I interviewed him. And at the time, he was talking about the trust over a IP stack. So how you build these trust frameworks and the governance that sits behind a decentralized kind of solution to digital identity. And it is really quite complex. There's the technical stack, and then you've really got a governance stack that shadows it or parallels it. And I think I think they've got 4 different levels to that. And then COVID came. And of course, it was everybody kind of changed and started to work on COVID credentials then. So the credentialing that sits behind some of these digital wallets that will have credentials for coronavirus and potentially other health information really seems to have taken the focus now. And what's interesting about that, of course, is that there are offerings for us that are global. There's the IATA system, where obviously that's for international travel for airlines. There's the Common Pass, World Economic Forum. And I do think the more that happens interoperably and globally on coronavirus, the more chance potentially in the future you've got some kind of global system of standards and interoperability for the rest of the digital wallet, no matter what it might want to carry in the future.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned wallets there. Obviously, Facebook tried Libra, sorry, not Lira, but similar. Last year, failed miserably, kind of sort of resurrecting at the moment. Do you think Facebook's going to be the one to own it?
I think Facebook could own a digital currency of some description. You can see a sort of tokenization coming and potentially a currency coming. I mean, how they really have it. Maybe it will be a stable coin, maybe it will be a currency, I don't know. But one thing I was aware of is this this system that is going to be trialed, which is a kind of good health system, which could be an interoperable standard across the globe. And one of the interesting things is there are a lot of people working on that who believe in privacy by design. So the answer to your question, I think, is going to come down to how much the people in the 21st century really rate and value their privacy. Because if they rate and value their privacy, I don't think it's going to be Facebook. Just the story I've just told you is just a very small, minuscule example of some of the things that are going on. It's obviously not just Facebook that has these problems, but if it starts from the standards rather than the platform, in this case, a social media platform, then I think Facebook will find that they're out of the game, actually. And obviously, it's interesting you say about Libra. It's called something else now, Neum, is it? But it hit regulatory roadblocks, and then the partners kind of dropped out. So I do think that you have to have the fundamentals, the basics, where you can really show people that you are credible, very believable on standards and safety first.
Yeah, I definitely feel they missed a trick there by sort of announcing it and be like, oh yeah, we'll talk to the governments next week about it. You know, that's going to destabilize everything. So yeah,
just goes to show how much power and influence they have there, or certainly how much they believe they have, and yeah, they probably do.
That last one, definitely, that they believe they have. There are forces out there bigger than Facebook, so it'll be interesting to sort of see how they go after it. Right. Don't forget, if you want to ask a question, just request the mic and we will get to it, and that's the thing. Or tweet if you want, Friday Futures, and I'm reading those. You talk about different age groups. Actually, no, you talk about biometrics in the book a lot. Hands, fingerprints, voice tone, emotion, that sort of stuff. Is the future of work just being verified and logged, or a biometric to sort of be used to better the performance of people, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because again, when we thought, well, people are going to be working from their homes remotely, gosh, they'll be in their own environment, in their own spaces, and that'll be either, safer or more comfortable. And what we saw was a plethora of new startups and new tools that came in to really put surveillance into people's homes, so that they could be watched and analysed and monitored in terms of how they were working, whether that's keystrokes or webcams or, as you say, biometrics. I hope it isn't going to be just, verifying us, but there are some very important things that do need to happen at work and do need verifying. So if you want to sign a document, I mean, increasingly our documents, certainly over the past 18 months, it's been almost impossible to sign a document that hasn't been digital. So those kinds of authentication and verification are really important, and that will protect people, I think. We know that in China there's lots of offices of very well-known brands like companies like Alibaba who already use a lot of facial recognition, iris recognition, other kinds of biometrics to even just enter the building. I think people have got to become much more aware of the potential for this technology to become a monitoring tool, and there needs to be more research carried out. We need companies to step up and put the research and the analysis in, and let's look at it in real life. Let's do a pilot and see where it takes us. At the moment, I'm not hearing that much about those sorts of things. I don't see any kind of real world experiments yet. Maybe I've missed one or two, but I think that's what's needed. We need to see it in the practical environment, because we need to know how people will react to it. We need to know how people will feel about it. Even if you think about the way in which we're starting to analyse people when they come to their first interview. Well, I say come to their first interview, they don't, do they? It happens remotely, happens virtually through a screen, and then you're analysed by an algorithm. I I have some real qualms about that, to be honest.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm starting to see real change, or real numbers when it comes to like people going back to the office and sort of identities of different groups and that sort of, or not identities, sorry, feelings around the future of work with regards to different age groups and that sort of stuff. You talk about different age groups in the book, actually. The form it into a question, Paul. Their ideas of identity when it comes to the workplace and sort of hybrid working. Any advice for managers when it comes to sort of managing down and junior team members managing up so that identity and quote unquote finger wheels truths are maintained?
I think this is a major issue and potential for tension in the workplace. I didn't really talk about it too much in the book, and you and I haven't spoken about it before, but I did do a big project at the end of 2019 on the future of work for women, for the Women's Business Council, actually. It never saw the light of day, sadly, because of COVID, but lots of recommendations I now made in it are now coming true. So that's quite interesting. But I put an intergenerational spin on it, or lens on it, actually, because I could feel that there was some tension, let's not say conflict, tension between the generations in the workplace. And I wanted to find some insights and research it further. So we did look at at the time what was a workplace environment through an intergenerational lens. And what became really clear was that there's just this huge differences. Each generation, I'm talking at the kind of at the polar opposites, I'm probably talking about higher end of Gen Z and some millennials versus boomers who are, probably on their way out of the workforce now. But each of them kind of looked at the other cohort as lazy, which was kind of interesting to me. So, but for different reasons. So the younger generations were sort of looking at the older ones going, why don't you know the productivity tools? Why can't you use this quicker? Why haven't you taught yourself all of this IT and these digital tools, because it's part of life? And couldn't understand really why older people hadn't made the effort. And then the older generation sort of looking at the younger generation going, can't believe you want to come in on time and leave on time. Can't believe you take your lunch break and don't work through it. Got some questions about the fact you don't want to pick up the phone and have a conversation with someone. It's always over email. So there was a real mismatch and a misunderstanding of each generation. And one of the other aspects of that was definitely this idea of, being yourself at work and also having a boss. So a younger generation was saying, look, they'll get more out of me if they treat me as a peer. I don't want to work for a boss. Okay, they might have more experience than me, but I've got a lot to bring to this as well. And we need to be thought of as being, on a level, not in a hierarchy. And if you do that and you talk to me as if we're both on the same level, then you'll get more out of me. And that's just a very different sort of attitude that an older generation had, which was like, I'm more senior because I'm older, and therefore I will sort of pass this down to you. And there's very much a sense of delegation in a hierarchy rather than being a peer group. So that was one of the interesting things to me. And because of that misunderstanding and that kind of tension, there's a whole other load of problems that kind of drop out of that. But that's what they stem from, really. Complete misunderstanding of what each generation is there to do and how they like to work and how, importantly, you'll get the best out of them.
I often hear that workplaces pre and sort of pre-pandemic and post and now and all of that sort of stuff, they want their people to bring their full selves to work, but often that just means speak up in meetings, I find. Has the pandemic made it easier for people to sort of express themselves or identities because there's like a lack of physical presence, like people literally in the room and being overbearing? Or do you think Zoom's created sort of new identity behaviours?
Well, one of the things it has enabled is, you're right, more and different varied voices in the room. So you don't have to go to London for an event where you can network and meet important people. Some of those meetings and events and networks are now virtual. So it is letting a lot more people from different regions throughout the country and from different backgrounds actually take part and have a voice in lots of the discussions and debates. And I do think that's a great thing. It really does depend on how you present yourself into some of these virtual environments. Because if you're just on a Zoom call and it's just you staring at a screen and lots of other people, it is probably more than likely that the people who are vocal at work are also vocal on those sorts of digital conference calls, if you like, or visual conference calls. And so other voices get screened out because they're not forward enough, they're not assertive enough to come forward. So you do get a lot of noise from the people you would expect, and a less contribution from people who are more reticent. But if you come to those sorts of virtual environments, with an avatar or with some sort of character or presence in those sorts of environments, it can certainly change the way in which people feel confident, and change the way in which they contribute to those sort of conversations or initiatives or whatever you've got going on. I mean, in the book, actually, I talked about the Proteus effect, which is a really interesting experiment done by Jeremy Bailenson and some of his colleagues. And they found that if you go into virtual environments with a particular avatar, it affects how you feel about yourself. And the research makes it very clear that it's not about how other people think of you with these different avatars on. It's what you think of yourself. So one avatar might make you feel more confident, might make you feel like if you're taller in this avatar, you actually act differently, more confidently. If you're smaller, you actually have a more difficult time negotiating, things like that. It's absolutely a fascinating experiment. And I think that's a real clue to the future about how we might turn up to different environments with different avatars and different characters and presentations of ourselves if we want to achieve a different end. See what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Let's talk about virtual offices for a sec then. Yeah, I think how to phrase. The technology is technically there, right? To have VR keyboards, a headset, and that sort of thing. So you can literally be anywhere in the world, virtual, that sort of thing. But the office experience is actually quite janky at best at the moment. Let's fast forward when it's here. Are we sort of destined for the world of work where our co-workers are going to dress like rabbits in the latest Gucci NFT trainers with a hockey mask?
I hope so.
No. Sort of tempted it would be fun, or do you think identity norms are going to still persist when you can have a hockey mask if you want to take into the office, which I think is terrifying?
No, look, what's going to happen is the whole way in which we think about time and space, like going to a meeting, it's going to become, we're just going to bend it completely out of shape. So what's going to happen is we will have a wardrobe of avatars, and we can choose whichever one is appropriate for the achievement or the outcome of, I'm going to call it an event, not a meeting, because it really is like an event. And potentially you can send in time, you can send those avatars to different meetings at the same time. So it could be, for example, that we are sort of like the technician behind the scenes, and then we send these avatars out to do the communication that we would like to do. And it can happen not just sequentially, but all of these events can sort of coexist in time and space, because potentially you could kind of meet yourself as a different avatar in one of these spaces. So you could kind of have a meeting with yourself if you wanted, in these different guises or with these different characteristics. And I think once that starts to happen, who really knows where it will really go then? But I think what we've got at the moment is quite a rigid, quite a linear way of thinking about what are, frankly, really immersive, magical environments to come. And I think what's happening is, and what most people haven't quite absorbed yet, is that we are in this era of post-literacy. It sounds quite scary. It's not meant to be. It's just that we've entered this world of virtual, as you just said, but it's not just that. It's video-based imagery, it's social media feeds, it's being on this audio now with you. It's not literacy, it's oral and it's audio. And so it goes back to what Marshall McLuhan was saying, really, about what will happen in post-literacy or what's different. He said something like, there's a separateness through when you're writing out a language, you're creating a separateness from one individual to the other, but also for one individual to their environment. And so something like language does for intelligence what the wheel does for the feet and the body. It enables people to move from thing to thing with greater ease and speed and ever less involvement. Now, that's what literacy, rationality, excuse me, and an alphabet that you are writing out brings. Now we're in these virtual, absorbing, immersive media environments to come, and it'll be our emotions. We're much more in touch with our emotions and other people's emotions, much more in touch with the environment around us. And so it's difficult to say how that's eventually going to pan out, but it is going to be much more emotional than it is rational. And so in a funny way, if somebody does want to turn up like a rabbit in the latest Gucci NFT app, I can kind of understand it, because that's the kind of environment that it'll be. Different to where we are now, very, very different to where we've been for the last couple of 100 years with literacy.
I'm definitely seeing lots of issues with literacy, written and oral, and that sort of stuff. I'm a demon for saying the word like and stuff like that in when I'm talking and that sort of stuff. So definitely lots to sort of learn. I think these tools are going to help us be better communicators in lots of different ways.
Yes.
I definitely
in a much more human, much more collective way, I think.
Yeah, no, there was a lot in the book that I was sort of surprised by when it comes to facial recognition, but also how people feel about these technologies, and sort of certainly when they get applied to them rather than them applying it. What other technologies do you think business should be assessing now to sort of future-proof their business when it comes to identity for their and customers, which we'll come on to?
It's difficult for me to know because I don't work in that environment, but the obvious one, I suppose, is because everybody's talking about it and trialing it, is GPT-3 or any kind of version of artificial intelligence that will help you co-create something. So at its simplest, I suppose GPT-3 is start something off for you, whether you're writing a board pack or a pitch presentation, and then you can finesse it. I do think that's interesting. I have spoken to a few people who are working with it, and they actually think that there could be a whole industry, a whole separate industry going to start up, which helps you absorb this, not into your organization, but it will completely re-choreograph, if you like, how people work, how teams may or may not operate. Maybe you won't even really be able to ever operate as an individual in work anymore, because you're always as a unit with artificial intelligence in this way now. When I was doing a project for one of the big consultancies a couple of years ago, they were already talking about the fact that you go to the meetings and say you're a salesperson, you don't ever have to really take any notes, because by the time you come out of it, the artificial intelligence has monitored and analysed the conversation and has already worked out what the actions are from that meeting, and has probably started to carry some of them out. So it definitely begs the question of what are the administrative functions anymore? Maybe there won't even be any. And it potentially also points to the fact that we won't be doing any really kind of simple number crunching or simple data work, because obviously these systems can do all that for us, but then they can also do the complex stuff too. So again, it begs the question, where do humans fit into all that? But if something else is starting off your projects, and even more than that, determining what needs to be done on your projects or with your customers or your clients, or it's really encroaching in the relationship that you've probably built with customers over a long period of time. So again, we need to see some trials and some pilots on that to see how it really will work in practice. But I definitely sort of see the HR department, for example, never really ever giving you an appraisal on your own again, if we even have appraisals. It's you and your digital assistant. It's you and your GPT-3 or whatever the artificial intelligence being is. But it's you and them working in concert as a unit, and so really should be appraised together.
I definitely think that's the path to go on. When you look at what Slack and other sort of messaging services analytics are, they're definitely pushing more towards the person sort of self-correcting, not like it coming down from the top. Obviously that potential is still there, but increasingly you're starting to see the use of bots, aren't you? So people can sort of self-correct, or sort of, oh, I didn't know I was doing that, I'll see if I can do that. It's interesting who's going to set those rules and those alerts, I think, and that sort of stuff.
Well, you've also seen it, Paul. It's just important to say you've also seen it in social networks already prompting you. Do you really mean to say that? Or we might change this word here or there. Or people are, I mean, yes, you're right, say correcting, because that's how it's seen. But they're not. They're socially engineering the relationships that you'll have with other people, because there is an element of control in the communication, either implicitly or explicitly, which I find absolutely fascinating. How much autonomy will you really have over determining your own relationships with other people, particularly in the workplace, your clients or customers, if you have this intelligence, which is really becoming, it isn't even separate, it's becoming part of you.
That brings me on nicely to a question I had. So you mentioned there that the tools and the software is sort of like helping us to be, or potentially helping us to be better people and that sort of stuff. A lot of people are now starting to sort of create alt accounts. They're becoming super popular. A public account or a private account where they can say things on Instagram or follow things on Instagram that aren't basic, or however you want to describe it. However they do it, they're doing it, right? Usually that co-workers can't see or something like that. Surely we're not bringing our full selves to work if this is the case, right? How can businesses sort of encourage their people to share all sides when it might be shareholder unfriendly?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, again, it depends what we think our full self is. To date, the conversation around the authentic self, which you touched on earlier, and bringing your full self to work has been what is the core notion of me. And it's been a kind of, if you can boil it down to the fundamental things about you, and actually you need to bring those to work, and they don't need to be fighting with your personal life. They need to have some coherence and congruence. But actually what I think is happening is that we're expanding out the very notion of the self, and therefore when you bring your full self to work or life in general, it's just a much more it's a much more expanded self. And for instance, you might decide that you have you have your meta self, and then there's these other individual sub selves, and you might have one that goes to work or says things about work, one that has an opinion or deals with personal and family and friends and social, and another one which potentially is a pseudonymous identity. And that one is the one where you really say all the things you actually think, and you can say it publicly, and maybe actually in time you even monetize it, so it could become a revenue stream. Potentially it's something for whistleblowers, but it's not just that. And I think in the future, and Balaji Srinivasan has talked about this a lot, and he calls it this pseudonymous economy, you might have 3 or maybe even more different identities. But if you are comfortable that they can be managed and you have some coherence between the 3, even though each of them is carrying out a different role, then that's fine. You have an integrity to the self, but you're very aware that you are sending out. It's a bit like sending out your avatars to play different roles. You have different versions of yourself that just go out and do these different things. The pseudonymous one is very important because it allows people to tell the truth about what they think is going on in their companies without jeopardizing their position, or even increasingly jeopardizing their social status in a social group. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi guys. Sorry, there was like some technical issue. So this is my first time on Twitter show. So my name is Zoltan. I'm the co-founder and co-chair of Tech London Advocates Remote Working and Global Tech Advocates Future of Work, and I'm the founder of futureofwork.uk. Paul, I work with Paul, and Paul, thanks for putting this together. It's an excellent event, and Tracey, I really like love your input actually. So I will definitely, like look into your book. So there is, like a lot of things that resonates with me. I have something really sparked my interest when it comes to, like avatars. So my question is that we are discussing how the tech and the digital are creating new jobs and opportunities for disabled people, because there are people who can't leave their, like home, and they can't go to their offices. So my question is, when it comes to, like avatars and other new opportunities, let's say there's a disabled person who is an engineer, and most of the time he can or she can do, like the job from home, but from time to time he or she needs to go on site. So do you see that we will have physical avatars? Because what I'm seeing is that that we have Boston Dynamics who are creating this, impressive robots, and on the other side we have the Microsoft HoloLens 2, and I think, like if you match these two technology, this should work. I mean, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I had a funny thing happen to the phone. I don't know if you could hear me for a while. I think the best piece of stimulus for this is the X Prize Avatar film. And what's interesting about that is the way in which they analyze the potential of these avatars is they divorce the person from the skills. So the physical person, if you like, from the skills that the person has or can acquire. And it's the skills that go out in the guise of the avatar and can potentially go out to disaster zones anywhere in the world and carry out some of the work that's required, or potentially even go out into space to explore in dangerous areas. And I do think I think everybody should watch that, because it's a really inspiring film, and it's a good way to remind us that we might be able to split our identities and actually send the skills off somewhere, whilst we might reside in a particular physical location. So I think that might be one of the clues to the future of that.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alton, for the question. If anyone else has a question, just nip down to the bottom left hand of your screen and request the mic, and I can bring you up on stage. We'll pause and that sort of stuff. As you've seen, interactive, it works and that sort of stuff. So super fun. So make sure you do it, or use the hashtag Future Friday, should you wish to keep on eating. All right, Tracey, I want to talk about WhatsApp for a second, because I think it's showing, or perhaps testing, a new, some have said probably more Chinese way of thinking and pushing services recently. Essentially, they're saying accept the terms of service or don't use the app. Do you think more businesses should act in this sort of way and take stands with customers?
I think it depends on the maturity of the market. I think if you have got a monopoly on a market, then you should not be able to put caveats around it and allow some people to enter and deny access to others, particularly based on their opinions or their beliefs or anything like that. And as far as I'm concerned, the likes of WhatsApp have, I haven't really thought about it massively specifically to do with WhatsApp, but I think they've got a monopoly to an extent on messaging, in that there isn't really anybody else who's going to come and compete against them. Yes, I know we've got Signal and Telegram and all of those, but not to the same magnitude. And if you've got a monopoly, then I do think it's your duty to make it as accessible to as many people as possible, and to take on some of these challenges that customers are going to put at your door. That's just the nature of it. That's how monopolies in nation states used to, the likes of BT or whatever, would have to observe access for and be as inclusive for everybody. If there's competition in the market, and it's really strong and healthy competition, then I think you can start to define your own boundaries and be more picky about who has access. But we're not at that point now. It's a monopoly right now. I don't think this should be permitted.
I think it's interesting, because on the one side you've got sort of brands like Patagonia, who are sort of very sort of pushing their envelope and that sort of stuff, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. And then other people I talk to feel that they can't really sort of do that. So I definitely think it's something that a lot of brands maybe want to do a bit more, but possibly don't either have the brand capital or gumption maybe to sort of.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you can have your little it's a bit like the jewelers who will say, only you can come in, you'll have to stand at the doorway and we'll come and let you in. If you're bespoke and you're small and you've got a niche audience, that's fine. But if you are a communications platform, that is really different, I think, because preventing people from communicating, I don't think is ever good. And even if you think that there's bad communication out there, the answer is never to limit communication. It is just to open it up even more. So more communication is always the answer. And the problem with this is you're kind of putting barriers in the way so people can't communicate.
Yeah, I think so. We have a request from Carthy Kean, so I'm going to approve him. Give him a second just to sort of come up. But I think it's interesting. I think there's a lot of stuff going on with brands, trying to be bold, whether that's through their advertising and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of that comes down to the identities of not who's just creating those ads and strategies and that sort of stuff, but also who they think their consumers are. I want to talk in a minute about consumers post-pandemic as well. But Carthy, you're up. You've got the mic. Hopefully you can speak. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul. This is like a elite forum. I'm just amazed by the opportunity. Thank you so much. So actually, I'm an MIT mentor recently for the hackathons. Like the Hack for the Future hackathon recently happened by Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So there is a entire theme on what is the future of work, and like a lot of teams participated in that hackathon with coming up with apps, solutions, all that, right? So this is very concerning. Like the work, pandemic has forced us into work from home and other issues. So the concern is like how to be productive and how to be how to be loyal, and at the same time how to be working with the customers and all that, right? So this hackathon presented us with a lot of topics and solutions.
Brilliant. Carthy, what was the question there? Just a succinct one. Did you have one or?
So actually, before the question, I have some advertisement about the work. So right now, India is going through second wave crisis, and there is a US based organization, PathCheck. PathCheck is founded by MIT professor Ramesh Raskar. So they are doing great job. I just want to thank the PathCheck team for the amazing work they are doing in India. And
excellent. Mute your mic for a sec. Think of your question and I'll have you back in a sec, all right? But advertisements we'll do a bit later because we're limited on time, all right? So think of that question, I'll bring you back. Tracy, while we just talk, and anyone else, please grab the mic, take a question and that sort of stuff. The question I had before, we're going to do that. What should brands be thinking right now when it comes to our identities that they're coming out of the pandemic? Do you think we're just a bunch of traumatized versions of our or is it different? What does that sort of mean?
I think companies are just going to have to be flexible in their attitudes. So I think what we had before the pandemic was definitely a sense of like, here are the rules around how we work and our culture here. Fridays you can work from home, but the rest of the time you come into the office, for example. Then we've gone to the other extreme where everybody is working remotely and turning their living space into their workspace. I think in the future, companies are going to have to just be more fluid and flexible because lots of people are going to want to work in lots of different ways now. So we can't go to the other extreme where it's like, well, you always work from home now. People have different lifestyles, they have different needs, and as you just alluded to, different sort of psychological needs, not just sort of working environment needs. And so if one person wants to work from home twice a week, or they want to move to a job share, or whatever it might be, I think it's a challenge to companies, but they're going to have to fit in a way. Let's say they're going to have to personalize the work environment to the colleague or the employee. I think that's highly challenging. I know it is, but we've got lots of tools, and we've got lots of communications tools as well. We should be able to manage this.
I certainly hope so. I think there's a lot of issues sort of going around with not just fear, but also are we missing out on opportunities to sort of create a better world, the future? We're doing a lot of research at the moment in this at TLA, and we'll be releasing that shortly. I'm interested to sort of know your sort of take on when it comes to the identities of bosses and managers and people who are in charge of groups of people post-pandemic. is anything fundamentally going to change for the hybrid teams versus the remote workers? How do you see their sort of like identities adapting? Because it's kind of like almost maybe a have and have not scenario could happen. Is that fair to say?
I think so, because there was an interesting article, I think it was last week, where, now what was it? I think it was the chief exec of the Washingtonian media suggested that for those who wanted to work from home, work remotely, potentially companies could do away with staff benefits. They could basically get to the point where they treated people like contractors. And I do think there was a massive backlash to that, as I'm sure you saw. But I do think there will be that incentive, especially as we're having to cut costs in lots of areas post-pandemic. Companies may want to think, oh, just because you're a worker and you choose to work remotely doesn't necessarily make you a contractor. But I think people will be encouraged to be thinking like that. The biggest problem, I guess, is the lack of empathy. People are having to recover from the pandemic, financially. They're having to recover personally, and maybe even in terms of health-wise. And then you've got to rebuild all of your relationships. It might be quite difficult to do that when it's 100% virtually. But nevertheless, we're going to be working in a much more technological, automated working environment anyway soon, no matter what we do. So a lot of effort needs to be put in, I think, to usher in more empathy and actually to kind of facilitate some more authentic social exchanges, even though those are involved at work. And I think the one thing we can do is stop thinking about work as a place. And I think we've learned that in the last 18 months. Yeah. I was saying that way before then. I was saying work is a network. It isn't a place. And if we can think about whether it's the corporation or the company or even the individual employee as a network, they're a mini network, then we can start to rebuild relationships that make up a network and also enable it to even work, rather than thinking of a place and a location that you need to commute to, and try and build some empathy back into the relationships within the network that way.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? All this technology is absolutely great, and I do think it adds a lot to our life, sort of the way that we work and productivity, but it can sometimes strip us of the humanity that we long to sort of like strive back for, certainly post-pandemic and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's also worth saying that generationally, during the pandemic, a lot of boomers have left their positions and very senior positions. And by 2030, 75% of the workforce anywhere will be millennial. And so, again, we need to build back into these systems, these networks, millennial values, because they'll be in charge very soon, and those will be the values of the working environments, not the boomer values that we've been used to over the last sort of 20 years.
Yeah, I think that is the one thing that I hold on to, is through a lot of things, political and that sort of stuff, is the world in the next 20 years is going to be radically different, just because people are going to shuffle off, that are voting different ways and all of that sort of stuff. So it's quite interesting. All right, Nick Child, CEO of DIRT, Neuroscience Research. We had him on Mousewatch Show, which is another Twitter space. He's also an experimental film director and lots of other stuff. Sundance, South by Southwest. Nick, what's your question?
Hey guys, Tracey and Paul, thank you for such a great wake up here in America today. And Tracey, I love your point of view on all of this. I'm very optimistic nowadays, or trying, but I want to play devil's advocate a bit and ask you, in my experience at large companies, HR has, let's just say, very often not worked seemingly to the benefit of the employee, but rather to the company. How do you see that shifting in the landscape that you're projecting now? Do you think that HR fundamentally will need to shift to truly be about supporting everything from reviews, as you mentioned, to actual kind of journeys for the employee, as opposed to protecting the company?
Yeah, such a good question, because I remember the days when it was called personnel. Yeah. And you remember those days where it's actually about the person. And you'd have somebody who most of the time you felt had some sort of paternalistic interest and cared for you as a person. And then it became HR. Although we naughtily used to refer to it at BT as human remains. But it then became much more sort of automated. And you're right, the shift happened. And I think there's another shift in the future, which is individual employees just taking a lot more control. So I don't think there'll be HR in the future. I don't think certainly won't be a silo, and it won't be a department in the way it is now. Maybe you'll have legal and financial, and then individuals will take much more personal responsibility for their own training, for their own skills. You know, by the time we've got brain machine interfaces, you know, we'll be downloading potentially downloading languages or using more IT space to increase our IQ. And I think in those sorts of environments, you as an individual would want to take much more responsibility for that. It's funny, I've started to see it in appraisals with people where the appraisal isn't an annual appraisal anymore. It's an appraisal when the employee, if you want to still call it that, feels that they need it, when they need some extra help and they want some feedback. And so I think it's a bit like, you know, gyms. We used to go to a gym, sign up to it, and maybe go twice or three times a week to an out-of-town big retail space. And actually, then these digital training programs came along, and people just do whatever exercises they want, wherever they want, through the app. And I wonder if that's how training and education and skills are really going to be, I was going to say delivered, but are actually going to be absorbed by employees themselves, and they'll take much more control of because they'll be they'll be in demand. So maybe the power shift is going to switch.
Definitely.
Sorry, I apologize for the previous message. Now I have a question. So this is regarding to like the new tools like Slack. Lot of tools have come up, agile methodology tools like work from home has pushed us to learn all these tools. So like how to from an employer perspective, how they can ensure like 100% participation.
How can you what? Sorry, I heard about Slack. How can you what?
Yes. Like
sorry, question again.
The question is like different tools like Zoom, Slack, different forms of agile methodology, right? So how they can ensure 100% participation in all the meetings and like participation in the agile scrums and all that, like how the employer can ensure like all that is happening, learning and the participation.
Got it. Okay, Tracey, any tips for getting people to participate in meetings?
I can't believe we're still going to be having meetings in the future. Are we? Do we have to?
Gather experiences. What do you think?
Hey, well, listen, we'll be able to send our thoughts straight to each other. We won't need to meet physically because we can just intuit from each other's thoughts. I do talk about that in the book and how it's going to, I mean, obviously I'm talking about slightly further future, but I do talk about how that can transform certain industries that depend on ideas and concepts and notions. In terms of productivity, I just think I was going to say at the moment we can't be in two places at once, but as I've already said, I think in the future we can. So you kind of send out your avatar. Everybody's going to have their own sort of set of virtual influencers, if you like, and you'll just send them out, and they can your digital assistant can kind of absorb all the messages, and will have to sort of coordinate it because your brain just can't do everything it's being asked to do at the moment on all these different productivity tools and apps. So
yeah, no,
an assistant to help.
I think that's true. I want to talk about one other thing in the book, but Joe, you've got a question as well. Joe is CEO of Motion Nutrition, which is a top UK startup. Used to be an athlete as well for the Commonwealth, but at the moment he's selling nootropics, which are amazing, and he's a TBD partner, full disclosure.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the intro, and hi, Tracey. Hi, everybody else. Tracey, I have a question for you that is not directly related to work, but actually it is, and I suppose it's in two phases. How long? So I'm 31 years old. How long do you think we're going to be working, and how long do you think we're going to be alive?
Oh, right, yes.
Love that answer.
Well, if you're Aubrey de Grey, you think we will be alive till 300, 400. You think that we'll be alive for many, many, many different generations. My view on that is he could possibly be right, and I do cover it in the book, actually. The whole idea of decelerating this sort of cell damage and aging being the cause of all these other diseases. It is a fascinating theory. But what I also think is societally, that brings a lot of problems. If we have a really, really older generation who may be sort of biologically fitter than we think of older people now, there's still a lot of people who will need to carry on work. What happens to their friends and family if they don't live longer? You know, there's so many schisms that could show up in society. I don't think that it's that sustainable. In terms of how many jobs will we have, I think we'll have lots of different micro businesses and lots of different jobs, and potentially we can send out our other mini identities to do several things all at once, as I was kind of suggesting about meetings earlier. So I wonder how many people will really end up working for big business in the future, because most of the trends are pointing towards even though they've been crushed, a lot of them in the pandemic, the trends are pointing towards a growth in entrepreneurialism and micro businesses and small businesses that create lots of different offerings over time and continue to pivot over time. So I think what's really happening is that the personal brand is coming back. The brand that belongs to the corporation, fine, it's still there, but it's kind of diminished in a way. And what we're seeing is the growth of the personal brand. And whether that personal brand, however you decide to curate it in work and life and home and social and entertainment, it may have lots and lots of different businesses and lots of different jobs through its lifetime.
Oh, I love that. I'm so excited for the future. I wish I'll be around to see it, but you never know. Maybe I'll see more of it. I am eating more chicken salads at the moment. Right. I've got a DM question, and I am conscious of time. I don't want to go over because I am respectful of people's time these days. So social capital is critical to a thriving workplace more broadly for both employees and organisations. There is a shift to remote work happening, and that's changing the nature of social capitals in organisations, right? Not necessarily always for the better, right? While employees report more meetings than ever, they also report more isolation and less connection. The question is, looking forward to getting back to the office and conferences. Can't be the only one, right? Any advice for people who might be feeling a little bit sort of like, I can't wait to get back to the office? It's kind of like a bad, position to have at the moment.
Advice for people who want to get back or excited to get back, or what? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly that. People who want to get back. It's kind of like it's want to go back to the office, isn't it?
The people who anticipate that and look forward to being in the office and around people.
Yes, I think so.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's just the situation we're in at the moment. There's not a huge amount you can really do about it, I suppose. I mean, people have been trying to do it virtually, like keep networks going, to create groups and clubs and things, but it's not the same. I think the main reason we'll need to go back to the office, though, is for training. I think it's quite difficult to train people. I know there's a lot of talk about using VR to train people. I think it's quite difficult. I think you have to be together to train people, because actually you learn off other people, not through processes and from products. I mean, you can, but it has to be complemented with learning from other people. So if I were in that position, I would be pushing my company to put some training in so we could all get back ASAP, because I think that's the most important reason to get back to the office, not for a meeting, but for training together.
Yeah, I've also had a question using the hashtag. What will all right from Duncan Ray? Duncan, if you need to ask more, please do grab the mic. What will all this mean for countries, and where will people live, work, and therefore country economies?
Yeah, so people will live and work anywhere. I was saying this before the pandemic, that part of the reason, part of the effect of a digital or virtual currency will mean that people can be paid micro payments through borderless systems, and those borderless systems potentially could include nation state borders. So if I'm sitting in, I don't know, the Ukraine or Estonia, and I'm the best engineer and I want to carry out some micro tasks, then a company in the UK potentially could pay me micro payments for my micro tasks. They don't have to be micro, but that's just an example. So I think what's happening in Estonia is really interesting with the e-residency. I've got that. I can create my business and have it in Estonia and operate it anywhere in the world. That's going to make that's going to complement virtual digital currencies. And then the pressure is really going to be on nation states to either regulate that or put in some more obstacles or allow it to happen. But frankly, talent now is global and you can access it anywhere. You don't have to move to New York or London or wherever to be in the best place to work, because those places can reach out to global talent anywhere in the world.
I feel like if the pandemic's given us anything, it's that gift, isn't it? It's like you can now get educated anywhere in the world. Like the barriers to that have come down so drastically and so fast. I really don't feel we felt the effects of that, and I don't think businesses have yet. They're kind of in that make do, prepare and plan. I'm seeing a lot in planning mode at the moment for like big resurgences and that sort of stuff. So definitely think that world of work and the future of work has got a lot of green shoots sort of coming out, ones that we are seeing and ones that we aren't at the moment.
It's distributed work and a distributed workforce is what's saying about the network. And then anything else can be distributed, including your identity. Anything can be distributed across those networks. It's like a leveling down, but then a spreading out of these networks. And so decentralization and distribution, I think, should bring with it much more inclusivity inherently.
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping it does. I feel like that's, again, it's about time. There's so much that's sort of going on. Unfortunately, we are out of questions, Garth, so I will have to ask you to put it on the hashtag if that's all right. Turn your attention to the nest for a bit and just glance yourself over those links that I've put up. They are for Tracey's book. I can't impress upon you enough the need to buy this book. It is an incredible read, not just because of who wrote it, but also where the future is and where it's going. Tracey, can't thank you enough for chatting. I asked you to chat with us today because I think A, the book's great, but also B, at the heart of any business, it's a group of people, individuals who come together to sort of form something greater than themselves, and yet each has got different idiosyncrasies, needs and that sort of stuff. I think the pandemic, as I sort of mentioned a minute ago, it's been a reset point for a lot, and I think a real crushing element for others actually. Identity and people, feeling okay wherever they are, is not going away anytime soon. Any sort of final words of advice for business leaders or managers listening that want to navigate the next 12 months more successfully?
I don't know really. I think the main thing is, which is what I always say, is to think into the future and work back. We can't work out what's going to happen next by relying on the past. So what we need to do is think about and envision the world we want to create 20, 30, 40 or more years hence, and then work back. So what are the decisions we need to make today? How do we need to act today if we want to envision that future and see it become a reality? So that's what I would say.
Amazing. Thanks, Tracey. All right, folks, go out, buy the book and get a glimpse into your future. We promise you won't be sorry that you did. Right, that was the first Tech London Advocates Future Friday Lunch and Learn session with this moi, Paul Armstrong from Hereforth. Just a reminder before we go, tweet or DM me if you'd like to join TLA's Future of Work think tank and check out techlondonadvocates.org.uk for more details about TLA. That's Tech London Advocates, all spelt out, .org.uk. I will see you back here next month for a chat with the folks from Globalization Partners. They're experts in building, managing and getting the most from remote teams. So as Tracey mentioned, lots of that coming. I'm going to be talking and asking hard questions and getting to the bottom of some of the myths around remote working. So if there's any questions you want me to ask, please do use the hashtag. I am sure you will find out about many ways, but email me or DM if you'd like to be kept in touch, and make sure you check out techlondonadvocates.org.uk. Thank you for your time and attention. I've gone 3 minutes over, which I was very annoyed about, but hey, that's life, isn't it? Enjoy your Fridays. Make sure you make some good decisions to end your week, and write that to-do list, and make sure on that to-do list it's buy Tracey's book. The link is up there in the nest. I'll keep it open for a couple of minutes and then I'll shut it down. So enjoy the music until then. Tracey, thank you again for your time.